Well, hi guys. Coach Jerry here at The Protocol, and welcome to Coach's Corner. Today, we're going to be talking about the Kettlebell Snatch. The Kettlebell Snatch is the king of the kettlebell lifts. You'd be hard-pressed to find a single exercise that gets as much work done in the shortest amount of time as the Kettlebell Snatch. You've got strength, you've got conditioning, you've got some muscle endurance in there, you're working many muscles in the body. It is an awesome, awesome lift. If you went through your one-on-ones here at The Protocol, you may be wondering, wait a minute, if this exercise is so good, how come you didn't teach it to me in the one-on-ones? Well, it's a really great exercise, but it's also very technical. The other reason is we have some shoulder stability mechanics that we teach you in your one-on-ones first. We want to see a lot of strong presses. We want to see a lot of strong Turkish get-ups. In other words, we want to see really, really strong shoulders in a static motion before we start teaching you how to throw something up there and catch it. So if you're watching this video after you've been here for a short amount of time, this is the main reason why we wait to teach you the snatch. This video is going to show you the basic techniques, and it's also going to troubleshoot some common errors. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that we're going to talk about today is what we call the top-down technique. This allows you to feel the sensation of the kettlebell leaving your hand and floating all the way from the overhead position into a back swing. Also, as we're working on the top-down technique, we're also going to be talking about the overhead stability. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to do a kettlebell clean, and then we can either press or push press, whatever you got to do, to get that bell overhead. This is what we call the stability test. You know this kettlebell is safe to snatch if you can sit in a locked out position, bicep close to your ear, and you could even do a few waiter's walks. I'm not going to demonstrate that because I don't have the camera that can loop around, but basically you just want to take a few paces, like say about 20 to 30 paces in this overhead position. If you're not able to walk for 20 to 30 paces with this kettlebell in a nice locked out overhead position, it may not be safe for you to snatch yet. You could try to take a different bell, like a lighter kettlebell. You could also, you may need to also work on your overhead stability. So again, that's the reason why we don't take this technique at first when we're taking you through the one-on-ones. So with this, we figured out that this bell is safe for me to hold overhead. So what I'm going to do is the top-down technique, which looks like this. So what that does is it allows me to feel what it's like to drop the bell from that overhead position. One more quick note about the overhead position. How you hold the kettlebell overhead is more important than the fact that you're holding the kettlebell overhead. So what do I mean by that? If I'm going to pick this kettlebell up and get it into this overhead position, I want to be very mindful about a few things. When I say that your bicep is next to your ear, I don't mean touching. There's a cue in physical therapy. We say that your ear is shoulder poison. So if my bicep was actually physically touching my ear, chances are my shoulder is in a bad position. What that means is I've let it come out of the socket. So this is not a safe position, shoulder touching ear. We want to make sure that our shoulder is drawn in, packed, so the lat and the subscapular are doing work. When I say next to the ear, what I mean is in line. If I was going to hold this kettlebell out in front of me and it was very heavy, that's going to get real heavy real fast. I don't want to do that. So this is what I mean about a safe overhead position. The shoulder is packed in, the elbow is straight, and I feel like I'm stacked up on top of myself. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and do one more quick drill before we move on. We're going to do the top-down position, but instead of setting it down, we're going to catch it in the clean. It looks like this. Drop, clean. Press it back overhead, drop, clean, press overhead, drop. So I recommend practicing a few of those on both sides just so you can do a few repetitions and feel what that top-down technique feels like. Now that we've been able to feel that top-down technique, now the task, of course, is to get it back overhead. The technique that we're going to use to teach that has evolved over the years in here. There's been some debate about whether using various swing progressions to get to overhead is the best or clean progressions to get overhead. I think after a lot of testing, I think we figured out now that the best way to get the bell overhead without causing a lot of other problems that need to be corrected later is with using the clean as the base. So work that we're going to do here is going to be 3 steps. There's going to be a clean. There's going to be what we call a guard clean, so guard like in martial arts. And then once the guard clean is feeling good, then we're going to progress into the final movement, which is punching the ceiling, aka the snatch. So it looks like this. Clean. Guard clean. Snatch. Clean. Guard clean. Snatch. I would encourage you to practice that 3-step progression until it feels really good. Also, if you've done a lot of cleans but haven't done guard cleans and you catch your bell up here and it feels a little bit wonky, I would encourage you to practice the guard clean before progressing all the way to the overhead position. So now that we've addressed taking it down and pulling it back up, we're now snatching. Next, we're going to address some of the common issues that we see to help correct the technique and to make it just a little bit smoother and a little bit cleaner. The first thing that I want to talk about is how to, some alternate techniques for how to drop the bell. There's essentially 2 ways to drop the bell. The first way is what we call painting the fence. This is the simplest way. When you release your kettlebell, you are literally just getting it off of the back of your arm and sending it straight down and pushing it straight up. So we call it painting the fence like you're painting a fence. So with that one, you'll notice when I release here, the ball of the kettlebell is actually going to go over the top of my knuckles. It'll look like this. Stays nice and tight to the body and is turning over the top. That works for the vast majority of people. There is a potential plan B. One of the things that I've noticed in my technique is if I'm doing very high volume, it does tend, the turning it over the top does tend to accelerate the kettlebell a little bit, and it is a little bit tougher on the grip when you get to the bottom. Option B is what I like to call pouring out a pitcher of water. So I'll do it without the kettlebell so you can see it in slow motion. What I'm going to do is I'm going to release the bell slightly like I'm holding a pitcher of water, and then I pour out the pitcher of water as I go into the backswing. When I release from this position, what's going to happen is instead of the bell going up over my knuckles, it's going to rotate around my hand. And by doing that, it's going to accumulate less speed, which is less wear and tear on my grip when I get to the bottom of that backswing. Again, if you're doing a few sets of 5 to 10 reps, it's not going to make much of a difference. But if you're trying to get as many reps as possible in a snatch test, this could help you out a lot. I can't obviously demonstrate it in slow motion, but one of the cool things about the YouTube app is you can play this next part in slow motion in the app, and you can see how it leaves my hand in slow motion. Hopefully I do a good job demonstrating. Let's see how that goes. Again, you should have caught how the bell is rotating around my arm. That is pouring out the pitcher of water. I've also heard it called the waterfall versus painting the fence. Neither way is wrong, and both should help you with your drop technique. The next thing I'd like to talk about is how to avoid tearing up your hands. The propensity that some of us might have in the kettlebell snatch is to overgrip the bell. And if you're watching this and you're fairly new to kettlebell training, there's something important here that I'd like to show you. If you look at my hands here, this part of the hand, the only calluses that you should have here are probably from barbells. Kettlebell calluses do not belong in the center of your hand. Kettlebell calluses should sit right here. I don't know if the video is going to be able to pick that up or not, but I hold my kettlebell in the hooks of my fingers. And then when I turn my kettlebell over in the clean and in the snatch, I have another little callus here on the back of my hand. And the kettlebell is basically bouncing between these 2 parts of my hand. When I transition between one and the other, there's a spearing that's happening and an unspearing when I'm dropping. So again, very hard to show in slow motion. The slow motion feature in YouTube should help us. But when I begin at the bottom of the snatch, I'm here in the hooks of my fingers. And at the top, it's sitting very, very low in my hand. And what that allows me to do is to bypass the center of my hand altogether. The reason you want to get good at that when you're new to kettlebell snatches is the lighter bells have skinnier handles. As you go to fatter and fatter handles, you'll notice that a little bit of rub in the center of your hand is almost unavoidable. I have fairly small hands, and when I'm working with a 24 kilo, a 28 kilo, or a 32 kilo when I'm snatching, rubbing the center of my hand is basically unavoidable. So I'm trying to develop this stronger part of my hand that has less of a propensity to tear calluses, so that when I do work up to those handles where a rub is basically unavoidable, it prevents me from having torn calluses. Guys, torn calluses is not a rite of passage. It's not something to show off. You don't go on social media, look what I did in my kettlebell class today. A torn callus is an injury. Please, please, please do not tear your hands. It's lost training time. It's not good. Practice good technique. Hold your kettlebells right. The same thing applies in swings as well as cleans. The center of your hand should not be getting chewed up from high volume work. The next thing that I'd like to troubleshoot is excessive rotation. We see this in swings and cleans, but you can especially see it in the snatch because of that longer trajectory of the bell. And what I'm talking about basically is this. A very heavy bell in a one-arm swing, if you were not paying attention, this is what it wants to do to your body. When I go into that backswing, my entire body wants to rotate. And it's up to me and my transverse abdominis to say, no, 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 you get over here, you get over here. When I'm doing a one-arm swing, it should look like I have my other hand on the bell, but I don't. The same thing applies to the clean, and the same thing applies to the snatch. It's very easy to rotate too much in at the backswing, and then when you get to the top, you rotate out, which can also cause you to lose your center line, and this is going to be a lot of unnecessary wear and tear on the shoulder. So I'm going to do a couple reps here from the straight camera angle, just so you can see. You should not see an excessive amount of rotation. It should basically look like I've got a kettlebell, like I've got both hands on my bell. A little bit of rotation is okay. Too much rotation is going to present problems to your back, and it could present problems to the lockout position. The next issue that we see a lot of is what we call the late turn. I am not going to demonstrate that with a 16 kilo bell because it hurts. I'm going to take one of the smaller bells here to demo that. So a lot of times, and this kind of has something to do, I think, in some ways with the over gripping of the bell. But what will happen is the kettlebell is going to turn over on the back of my arm too late. This is precisely the reason that we stopped teaching it as a swing progression and started teaching it more as a clean progression. That alone should correct a lot of your problems. But if you catch yourself having this problem, it flips too late. In your mind's eye, like the bell's not really turning over until you're about here, and then it clunks over and it hurts. The turn of a kettlebell snatch is way, way earlier than most people think. When I first began teaching this, I would teach people to turn the kettlebell at eye level. And what I learned after a short amount of time was actually eye level is still too high. The kettlebell should start its turn like somewhere between like your chest and your belly button. If it starts to turn over early, when it gets to the top, it doesn't clunk into position, it just arrives into position. And it makes that turnover a lot easier and a lot less clunky on the hand. So again, not going to demonstrate that wrong with the 16 kilo because it hurts. But one of the things that you want to be thinking about if you do notice yourself bonking is to avoid the late turn. The last common concern that we see in here is what we call a failure to lock out. So what will happen is sometimes folks will start getting tired, their hips will start getting tired. They get the kettlebell about 3/4 of the way, and then they have to press the kettlebell into the lockout position. This is, first of all, bad technique, but secondly, it's a lot of work. One of the things that I usually tell people is once you get a handle on a particular weight for a snatch, and let's say I'm going to go up to a heavier bell, going up to a heavier bell should not involve a lot more work for my arm. It shouldn't be more here. It should be more here. So let's say for my hips, 16 kilo is relatively light. Let's say for my hips, I need a 5. So I'm going to turn my hip volume up to a 5, and I'm going to use that much hip drive to get my bell overhead. Now, if I want to snatch, say, a 20 or a 24 kilo, maybe with a 20 kilo, I need to turn my hips up maybe to a 6 or a 7. So I'm trying not to make additional work for my arm. I'm trying to make additional work for that hip hinge, that swing muscle. So my arm is doing about the same amount of work. If you want to do a fun drill for this, find a kettlebell that is a bit heavier, like 2 to 3 kettlebell sizes bigger than the bell that you're snatching with. Do 5 one-arm swings with that heavier bell, shake it out real quick, and then move over to the lighter kettlebell and snatch it, but still think about that same hip drive. That alone should keep you from having to press your bell to lockout. So if that does happen, just think to yourself, maybe I'm getting tired, maybe I need to focus more on the bottom half of the hip drive and not be so worried about what's happening here. One of the ways to help with that hip drive is the timing of the breath. So let's talk about this a little bit, because if you have been watching me so far, you may have noticed that sometimes the timing of my breath is not where it's supposed to be either. So happens to the best of us, no worries, we're going to clean it up right now. If you imagine if I was doing a one-arm swing, at what point do I want to do that forceful exhale where my abs and glutes contract? It's probably going to be right about here. So I can generate that force, send the kettlebell going forward. So where should the breath be in the snatch? Spoiler alert, it's the same spot. If you wait to breathe too long and get your at the very end, you'll have a little bit of tension in your lockout, and it may help with your lockout, but a far more effective place to work is lower, like around the spot of the top of the swing, and or when the abs and glutes contract, which should be about the same time. So it's a very, very subtle correction, and again, it's going to be really hard to show in slow motion, but you may want to watch this on the slow-mo on the YouTube video. Instead of doing this, it would look more like this. And as soon as I do that, I notice that I have more power getting that kettlebell up into that overhead position without feeling like it didn't quite make it all the way and my upper body is forced to work more than it should. It's a very subtle difference, but you will definitely feel it when you work up to heavier and heavier weights. Well, guys, there you have it. Those are the basics for the kettlebell snatch. Like any other skill that we teach in here, we always recommend that you start with lighter weight, start with lower volume, and really practice on perfecting the skill. Fatigue is your enemy when you're trying to master a new skill. So please make sure to work inside of a rep range and with weights that are very comfortable for you. And then as your skill gets better, then you can start taking up the weight and start taking up those reps. Like always, if you have any questions, please reach out to us at the information below in the description. Thanks again for watching Coach's Corner.